Itsuki was a cultured loser who constantly rejected top-level baddies to focus on his miserable life as a writer. His life suddenly took an even creepier turn when he realized that all he wants is to smash his sister's cakes. This story starts with one of Itsuki's stories about two depraved siblings who would usually wake each other up by exchanging mouth juices and spend the entire day trying to clout cheeks. Fed up with Itsuki's damaged mind, an editor named Toki tossed the script and got pissed at the cultured sociopath for taking so long just to come up with an Alabama love story for PDS. Itsuki claimed there was a lot more to the story, so Toki decided to read through the rest of the script and realized that he barely even mentioned the main character. He then asked why the little sister always had to be up to something freaky, so Itsuki explained the genius behind his depravity and gave Toki a glance into his damaged mind. Hoping for a trace of sanity, Toki asked if there was anything normal about the story, but Itsuki revealed that even the milk prepared by the little sister came from her underdeveloped milkers. Toki immediately went nuts and refused to publish the script, recommending a visit to the psych ward instead of trying to write another story. Before leaving, Toki told him to focus on completing the 5th volume of his recent series and ran into his stepbrother Chihiro on the way home. After exchanging greetings, Chihiro thanked him for putting up with Itsuki and said he was actually heading to his place to make dinner, so Toki wished him luck and wondered how different life would have been for Itsuki if Chihiro was a girl. Moments later, Chihiro got to Itsuki's place and asked about his progress with the recent series before getting started with dinner. Just then, a final boss nerd named Haruto showed up and exchanged greetings with Chihiro before stocking up Itsuki's fridge so the broke loser wouldn't starve to death. As they got seated to catch up on life as broke novelists, the doorbell rang again, so Itsuki went to welcome his college friend Miyako and a shameless midget named Canny, who immediately asked if he was down to smash. After letting them in, he told them about the series Toki rejected, and Canny felt good thinking that she was the only other person who read it. Unfortunately, both Haruto and Miyako also got a copy and were fully supportive of Toki's decision to protect innocent readers from Itsuki's non-existent moral code. To pass the time, Canny asked Itsuki for a makeout session and immediately got rejected. Haruto suggested playing a game instead, but Canny cussed him out for being a four-eyed cherry pop stopper. They eventually settled on playing a game, so Haruto told them about one called Turtle Soup, but his backwater accent made them think he was talking about a freaky version of Truth or Dare. He explained that it was a game about solving riddles that helped writers get creative, and Itsuki got excited to give them the first mystery, though his excitement was enough to make Canny finish. Itsuki's puzzle was for them to figure out why a man got happily married to a Sasquatch-looking lady, but they instinctively knew it was because she was the man's sister. Itsuki was surprised by how quickly they solved his professor-level mystery, so they explained that he had always only been capable of fantasies involving cultured sibling relationships. Haruto then took over with a mystery about a writer getting thanked for missing a deadline by his editorial team, which sent the entire group into several minutes of mental torture to figure out the answer. After asking a bunch of questions, Canny started getting close, but Itsuki interrupted her to act like his 5-kilobyte processing brain had actually figured it out. He then asked them all a bunch of questions to get hints from their ideas, and said the editorial staff probably got poisoned by the gas from their air vents, and thanked the writer because he came to extend the deadline and save them in the process. Haruto commended him on finally getting something right for once, and Itsuki immediately started boasting about being smarter than Einstein, so Canny asked if she could add to his intelligence by giving him some brain. Thankfully, Chihiro saved him by serving dinner, and Haruto warned him of the high alcohol content in the beer he bought. After Miyako complimented Chihiro's cooking, Itsuki told Canny that he would have considered smashing her cheeks if she had enough decency to learn how to cook. Moments later, they had just finished eating. But Canny was still craving dessert and asked Itsuki if she could have his Magnum sausage. Just then, Haruto got a text from his editor and got up to leave, reminding them that his manga was getting an anime adaptation, unlike a certain wannabe who wasted his potential on Alabama series. After he left, Chihiro and Miyako also called it a night and went home, but Canny hung back to try her luck with the depraved loner. As usual, he ignored her pickup lines, so she tried to drink some of the beer, but he tried to stop her since she wasn't ready for it yet and ended up spilling it all over her clothes. Moments later, she was in the shower thinking back on the dark day she found one of Itsuki's books and came out of her depression. She then grabbed one of his shorts for a steamy goon session and tried to charm him again before heading to her hotel. Itsuki saw that she forgot her sweater and thought back to the day she tried to introduce herself at an event and ended up throwing up all over his clothes. She went to his place a day after to give him a copy of her debut series as an apology gift and asked him out, but he asked for some time to think about it. After tweaking out over finally finding someone who liked him despite the obvious red flags, he decided to look through the first few pages of her book, but he couldn't stop reading and finished the story in tears. Days later, Itsuki was in the bathroom playing out one of his fantasies while Miyako was at the door, working on the excuse she was planning to use as a cover-up for her deep desire to spend time with him. Canny showed up moments later and started ringing the bell, but by then, he was deep in character and could barely hear them over the sound of his femboy voice. After trying to look inside, they realized that the door was unlocked and made their way in, while he finally got to the juiciest part of his fantasy right before Canny started taking pictures. He immediately covered his baby carrot and tried to explain himself, but she said it wasn't her first time seeing a mini sausage. Miyako, on the other hand, could not handle the sight of his vanilla buns, and Canny tried getting her to chill out until Itsuki chased them both out. He immediately tried to continue his cultured bath routine, but the doorbell rang again, so he wrapped a towel and saw Haruto, who was immediately at a loss for words and also ended up seeing his tiny woodpecker. At the time, Canny was staring at the pic of his rice cakes and asked Miyako why she freaked out, since college girls were usually top-ranked bops. Miyako's naive response made Canny curious, so she asked if Miyako was actually still a virgin. But she denied it and claimed to have handled more sausages than prime Mia Khalifa. Canny then asked about her life in college and specifically wanted to know about Itsuki. But Miyako reminded her that he was actually a dropout. That brought back memories of the day she was in class with her besties and saw the miserable loner obsessing over something on his laptop. Her friends naturally thought he was a miserable creep with no friends, and although that was true, Miyako actually found his mysterious life interesting. While she continued telling Canny all about her first experience with him, Haruto had just heard what happened earlier and felt pity for Miyako because she went through the unfortunate experience of seeing his mini sausage. He also got curious about how they even became friends, and that took Itsuki back to the day she approached him to ask what he was always typing on his laptop. After a brief social anxiety attack, he told her about his dreams of succeeding as a writer, and she met him in class later on after reading a copy of his book. She wanted to understand why there was always a cultured sibling love story in every section of the book, but he responded by saying her low IQ points were stopping her from understanding the genius in his writing. Naturally, she got pissed off and asked how a normal person with no mental issues would understand something so psychotic. But he already had the perfect comeback and told her that the exact same book had already been bought by over 100,000 people. He went on to call her a dust-brained bop who was clearly too deluded to appreciate being in his glorious presence, and she responded with a nasty slap that nearly knocked out his teeth. After telling him to stop being so mean, the tears started dropping, and he tried to apologize, but his lack of a social life caused him to use the abusive language he had grown up with. She tried to cuss him out, but their little argument had gotten everyone's attention by then, so they sat down. As Miyako explained how that experience led to the start of their friendship, she suddenly got upset and remembered the night he called to tell her about his decision to drop out. Hearing that made her incredibly upset, so she hung up the phone to deal with her emotions. She continued brooding over the memory of that day until Canny snapped her out of it to tell her how much she also wanted to have a meaningful relationship with Itsuki. After Miyako promised to help her get close to the sister-loving freak, Canny suggested spending the rest of the day in her hotel room. Moments later, they got on the elevator to her floor, and Miyako took a trip down memory lane to the first day she met Canny at Itsuki's place. Once they got to the room, Canny shut the blinds, and Miyako tried to read through one of her books. But she nearly got a heart attack when she saw Canny taking off her clothes and thought she was trying to rub lips. Canny then explained that she was used to working without clothes and immediately hopped on the computer to get started on her latest piece. But somewhere along the line of writing, she took one look at Canny and remembered walking home together after the first day they met. She stopped to tell Miyako about her feelings for Itsuki, but Miyako didn't understand what she saw in the creepy loner. Canny then told her about the severe bullying that forced her into a dark depression until Itsuki's books saved her, and the story brought Miyako to tears. So she grabbed Canny and promised to always be there for her. Later on, Chihiro had just made dinner at Itsuki's place, but Haruto stopped him from eating to get a picture together. Chihiro wanted to know why, so Haruto revealed his plans to build a fan base of girls who are into handsome, sausage-loving writers. After reminding him that he was built like a Twix bar in peak summer heat, Itsuki asked if the picture would affect his social image as well, but Haruto claimed it could also be a good move for him. Itsuki suddenly got heated about how he only wanted readers who loved his work, so Haruto agreed to keep his face cut out. Back in Canny's room at the time, she had just gotten to a crucial point in the book and asked Miyako for her melons so she could get a feel for the real thing. Miyako asked why she couldn't just use the perfect pair of melons on her chest, but she claimed hers were the perfect size and begged until she reluctantly agreed to it and popped out her massive milk jugs. At the time, Itsuki had taken one too many cups of beer and started rambling about his dream of having the perfect little sister to love. Haruto then told him about his not-so-great little sister to see if that would reduce Itsuki's obsession, but the drunk creep only went off the rails and continued his rant, while Haruto and Chihiro were trying to understand the depth of Itsuki's depravity. Canny finally finished with Miyako's melons and asked for her vanilla buns next. Moments later, Itsuki started begging for water, but Chihiro had already left by then, so Haruto got him a glass and stayed to make sure he was too drunk to do anything stupid before leaving. On the way home, he kept flashing back to one night 3 years ago when he started his journey as a writer and got an insane amount of hate responses from readers while Itsuki was already a fan favorite. When he got home, his little sister welcomed him with a series of verbal assaults and he tried to clap back, but she kicked him in the liver and kept cussing while storming back to her room. Days later, Miyako complained about the cold at his place, and he confessed to being a cheapskate who would prefer becoming a human popsicle than getting a new heater. Canny then suggested taking a random trip to Okinawa, and he immediately got up to give Haruto a call about it. The very next day, they took a flight to Okinawa, but Haruto ditched them to attend a meeting for his anime adaptation. Later that night, they went out for drinks, and Itsuki couldn't stop yapping about how good his beer tasted. Canny asked for a sip, but they both told her to try again when she gets to drinking age. She then asked Itsuki if her age was the reason why he had refused to clap cheeks, but he played dumb to avoid giving her a direct answer. After a lot of attempts to get an answer, he kept up the act with ease, since being dumb was already his default setting, so she asked to at least get a taste of the beer. He gave her an egg instead, and she used that as an opportunity to demonstrate her next-level tongue skills, while he deeply struggled to control his demons. Afterwards, he was in his hotel room trying to get some work done, but Miyako came through with cans of exotic booze, so they spent the following hours destroying their livers. At a certain point, she told him that Canny was out cold in her room and asked if he had ever considered going out with her. He then told her about the day he broke her heart by rejecting her first request for a date, and Miyako revealed that she had always thought he was a heartless player who just kept Canny around for fun. She then asked if he truly had no feelings for her, but he said it was complicated and asked if she had read any of Canny's books. With a sudden change of expression, he told her to read one because she was apparently far better than he could ever dream of, but before she could ask how he knew, the alcohol made him hit the snooze button. The next day, they spent some time looking through all the tourist attractions before visiting every popular spot they could afford and eventually ending up at a beach. Itsuki tried to take pictures to capture the moment, but Canny immediately tore off her clothes to get in the water, so he hid behind a rock to protect his already messed up mind. Watching Canny be so carefree despite having her full plot exposed to every otaku in the distance made Miyako rethink her boring and straight-up depressing lifestyle. Moments later, she also went commando and was trying to reach Canny when she stopped her to ask how she had such an amazing physique. That took Miyako back to her early days in high school when she ditched karate to join a friend in the tennis club, but Canny brought her back to current times to continue having fun in the water. Meanwhile, Itsuki spent the rest of that evening behind a rock and created another insane story about a whale shark whose sister got captured by a powerful villain. After the shark's ex swallowed the villain whole, the little sister agreed to marry her whale shark brother and started their love story with a kiss on the snout. Days later, an illustrator named Setsuna, who got dressed like the rainbow, read it and thought the story was a masterpiece to be recorded in the history books. After telling him that Toki naturally rejected his stupid idea, Itsuki went on to explain how the Godzilla-sized shark was supposed to smash the little girl's cakes, and Setsuna immediately drew up a sketch to bring his psychotic dreams to life. He then told Itsuki that all the fish talk was making him crave some sushi, so they agreed to visit a nearby restaurant but somehow ended up in another city, Hokkaido. After adjusting to the new environment with a local-style ramen bowl, they spent hours fighting the blizzard to find their hotel before Itsuki realized that they had been going the wrong way the entire time. The next day, he looked through the best seafood spots near the hotel, and they spent most of the day stuffing their faces with every shrimp on the menu until their bellies begged for mercy. To round up the trip, they went to one last food spot, and Itsuki reminded Setsuna of the flight time to be sure he was packed up, but he actually wanted to stay for an extra week to check out a festival. He wanted Itsuki to join him, but Mr. Spends-A-Lot knew he was too broke to afford an extra hour in the city, so he went to the airport to catch the next flight while Setsuna went to cancel his return ticket. Just then, Toki called, and he immediately told him not to bother expecting the new series anytime soon, but Toki was actually looking for Setsuna because he was about to miss the deadline for an illustration. After threatening to skin the rainbow-colored nutjob, he'd heard the flight announcement and tried to ask Itsuki why he was in Hokkaido, but he hung up the phone. Moments later, he boarded the flight home and kept looking through the pictures he took on the trips, while also thinking about the conversation he had with Setsuna about the latest series. Setsuna didn't understand why Itsuki didn't want him to do the illustrations, so Itsuki explained that his talent would be wasted on another one of his extremely cultured Alabama stories. In another one of her stories, two hotties were trying to enjoy the beach, but a storm suddenly appeared, and they got stuck in a massive tornado. Their brothers were making dinner at the time, and one of them used a magic barrier to stay safe, but C immediately ran into the storm to save the love of his life, Hild, who unsurprisingly turned out to be his sister. Once Itsuki was done with the draft, Chihiro served dinner, so they both feasted and Itsuki couldn't shut up about how good it tasted. Afterwards, he tried to act like the nonchalant older brother while handing over the souvenirs he bought during the trips. He also got a matching shark strap for Chihiro that made the femboy excited and caused Itsuki to break character for a moment. Days later, Miyako and Chihiro tried to enjoy a drama-free day at Itsuki's place, but he kept making weird sounds to obviously get their attention until they caved and asked if he was having trouble with the latest series. He then explained that his main problem was coming up with a summary for the announcements and teasers to keep the fans hooked without giving out any spoilers, so they asked why it was a problem since he was the one writing the entire story. After confessing to just being too lazy and incompetent to come up with something good, he decided to write whatever his 2-kilobyte brain could think up. The next day, Haruto dropped by with Valentine's Day beer and told him how rare the chocolate-flavored liver destroyers were. In seconds, Itsuki folded and asked for a bottle, but Haruto decided to make him beg like the shameless bops he loved to write about. Lacking even an ounce of self-respect, Itsuki played his game and continued begging like a sausage-loving simp until the girls showed up and Canny asked if they could start over. Moments later, they all got seated to drink and told Canny not to even think of joining them, but thankfully she came ready with a can of her favorite drink. Before they started drinking, Haruto took a bunch of pictures to continue his fake life as a femboy, and Itsuki's obvious lack of testosterone made it look too easy. After keeping up with his adoring fans, Haruto asked Canny why she turned down all the offers to give her popular series an anime adaptation. Hearing that also made Miyako and Itsuki curious, so she told them an adaptation would triple her workload and make it impossible to get enough time for Itsuki. Haruto then explained just how stressful it was because his anime adaptation was still in the works, but Itsuki got tired of his bragging and asked if any of them brought something other than beer. Canny immediately brought out the chocolate she got for him, but he suspected that it had been laced with something until Miyako said she had bought it with Canny just to make sure it wasn't another attempt to ride his sausage. After the chocolates, they brought out leftovers of the meal Chihiro made the previous night and took turns wishing they had such a talented brother in their lives. Right as Itsuki tried to brag about it, he heard the doorbell and almost crapped his pants when he saw Toki on the other side, looking like he wanted bloodshed. After spending a few minutes yelling about his plans to rip out every bone in Itsuki's body for missing the deadline, he went in to greet the others and got acquainted with Miyako. He then gave Itsuki a bunch of chocolates from his fans and brought some from Haruto's fan mail as well. Itsuki immediately pointed out the fact that his fans clearly loved him more, and Miyako asked why he had more when Haruto had more sales. After Haruto reminded her that a lot of Itsuki's fans were girls, he crushed the cultured writer's pride by reminding him that they sent the chocolates for his characters and clearly didn't know that a sleazy creep was actually behind the stories. Itsuki ignored his obvious jealousy and started munching on the chocolates while Toki got started on his first beer and made him promise not to disappoint his readers. The next day, Miyako tried to hang out at his place, but he told her to go get a life because he was expecting an accountant to help figure out why he was still broke despite all the success with his writing. To help Miyako's slow brain understand, he explained tax payments for authors and how an accountant could help them get some of it back in cases where they get charged above the expected amount. She then asked about the accountant, but all he knew was that they were referred to him by Haruto. After wishing him luck, Miyako left, and a couple of minutes later, the blonde midget accountant named Ashley showed up. She commended him on not being like the dirty, classless slobs she usually works with, and got started by looking through his payment records and expenses. Once finished with his payments, she asked why he didn't spend more on other things like a car because they could be written off as expenses to reduce his taxes. With the only thing on the record being the books he bought for research, she took a look around to find something else, and asked about the female figurines he had stacked up. He immediately activated geek mode to explain his love for little sister characters and addiction to getting the most famous figurines. She tried to list them as an expense for research, but he stopped her and said they were much too precious to be tagged as mere items. She then explained that putting them on the list would lead to more money he could spend on all the figurines he could ever want, so he stopped bitching about it. Next up were his games, and she made him explain every cultured little detail, like a closet creep before logging into his computer to track his subscriptions. As expected, he had premium payments to the hub and a couple of cultured gaming sites. Unlike the other items, she couldn't easily write them off and suggested slowing down on his corn research, but he claimed such an act would reduce his creativity and affect the characters of his books. After a lot of arguments over it, she decided to come up with something and eventually left when he got tired of explaining everything about his poor life choices. The next day, he asked Haruto why the referral didn't come with a heads-up explaining what he was going to be put through, but Haruto said it was nothing a writer shouldn't be able to handle. Just then, someone rang the doorbell, and Itsuki smirked like an evil villain about to end his arch-nemesis before bringing in Ashley, who immediately terrified Haruto. He got composed enough to greet her, so Itsuki joined him to ask about the trauma he had endured, but Haruto said it was the exact same thing he went through. Days later, Miyako saw right through Itsuki's pathetic attempt at being stealthy and ended up following him to a karaoke place. She tried to sing with him, but he refused and said he actually came so Toki wouldn't be able to find him. Right after he explained how much danger he was in for being so close to the deadline, Toki nearly gave them both a heart attack. He then told Itsuki about a tracker he installed on his phone and said he was willing to do anything that would force him to finish the book. To prove his determination, he carried Itsuki like a human-shaped purse and gave Miyako his card so she could call him if Itsuki ever tried to escape again. At the editor's office later on, Haruto was trying to work on his anime adaptation, but he got distracted by the argument between Itsuki and Toki. After Toki left him to write, he stared at the laptop for a few minutes before deciding to make a run for it. His genius plan to escape in a box led him to Setsuna, and he asked if Toki was also threatening to assault him for missing a deadline. But Setsuna said he was already done with the series and suggested visiting a bath to stare at rice cakes. Afterwards, Itsuki got to the mixed hot spring and finally managed to deactivate Toki's tracker before asking Setsuna why he was so desperate to see a bunch of cakes. Setsuna then told him about a new series that had a lot of caked-up scenes, which required extensive research so he could get the drawings right. Realizing that it was just for work, Itsuki decided to head in with him, so they went to get ready, but Setsuna's chiseled abs made him regret that decision immediately. He turned to hide his dad bod while taking off the shorts, but his perfectly sculpted wagon nearly made Setsuna switch sides. They both then prepared for a sight that would forever be burned into their minds, but after opening the doors, Itsuki saw that the chicks were actually senior citizens who looked like they paid the Grim Reaper for an extra couple of days on Earth. Setsuna got in and chopped it up with them like a true gentleman, but Itsuki was too traumatized to move a muscle until they started calling out to him. He still couldn't move, so they got out with their expired melons and surrounded him to force him in. Later on, he found a separate bath and tried to wash away the trauma, but Toki found him again and said he also placed a homing device in his clothes earlier on. This time, he tossed Itsuki into a solitary confinement unit used to force other lazy writers into writing their stories, and Itsuki desperately begged to be released. After threatening to end him if he actually misses the deadline, Toki showed him the container that would serve as a bathroom and left. Itsuki immediately broke down and thought he had finally hit rock bottom, but he eventually decided to make it out by doing his job. Using the trauma he experienced from Setsuna's senior citizen baddies, he created a bunch of demon minotaurs for his MC to fight. But the trauma was too much to handle, so he took a break. The next day, he had taken an entire pack of energy drinks and continued the story with Sieg's desperate attempt to find his precious sister that would lead him to a villain named Crom. This time, it was his fear of Toki that terrified him and made him realize that the entire scene was actually a dream. Just then, Haruto showed up to check on him and told him to give up if he really couldn't write anything else. He also used the opportunity to boast about how good his recent book was doing, and that made Itsuki feel jealous, so he decided to continue writing and told Haruto to make sure the others knew about his situation so they don't get worried. The next day, he finally got to the final scene and got writer's block, but thankfully, Haruto showed up again with lunch from Chihiro and the rest of his Valentine chocolates. After he left, Itsuki opened up the food box and found the spicy picture from the girls that brought him to tears. He then assassinated every crumb of the meal and chocolates before getting back to work. For the final scene, Sieg got surrounded by Crom's Minotaur army and lost all hope of victory, but his deep desire to reunite with Hild for their Alabama-style happily ever after slowly increased his energy level until he powered up and attacked. With the book finally finished, Itsuki got a bit overexcited and slammed his already starved brain on the concrete before passing out. Days later, he and Haruto went to the main bookstore where their novels had already been published and nervously watched to see how the sales would go. The first customer boosted Itsuki's confidence by picking his book, but a quick glance changed his mind, so he grabbed a copy of Haruto's instead and broke Itsuki's heart. After spending the rest of the day watching their books sell, Haruto's books sold a bit more, and Itsuki kept brooding over it at a restaurant afterward. Haruto told him not to even think of comparing since he actually put in the work to get his books sold while Haruto was spending all he had on spontaneous trips. They both ended up promising to continue their little contest and eventually figure out who was the better author, but Itsuki suddenly got a call from Toki and thought he had messed up again. His fears became shock when Toki said his series were finally getting a manga adaptation. The next day, Toki introduced him to a hot manga artist named Kaito and the editor Kohai, who would be keeping up with her work to get the adaptation ready on time. After his creepy staring made her shy, he asked Toki if she actually had what it takes to match his freak on paper. To ease his worries, Kohai brought out samples of her work, and he immediately fell in love with her style of drawing. She then confessed to being in love with his stories as well and explained how they made her realize that an Alabama love story was the only way to find true happiness. In a matter of seconds, they both started yapping about their mutual psychosis while Toki and Kohai wondered why their life choices led to such a meaningless existence. After several minutes of yapping, Itsuki told her how excited he was to finally have his work illustrated by someone who appreciated his genius, and she promised to do her best. The following weekend, they all went out for a picnic in a park filled with cherry blossoms, and Haruto made a toast to everything they had been working for in their personal lives. As they started eating, Haruto thanked the gods for finally giving Itsuki a taste of the spotlight, and Itsuki couldn't stop talking about how good of an artist Kaito was until Canny started asking questions. He then explained how Kaito's knowledge of his sister love stories made her perfect for the job. But Canny got jealous and argued over being the only one meant for him. Meanwhile, Haruto was trying to figure out why Ashley got invited to the picnic, so she apologized for always torturing him, even if he deserved every bit of it. She also couldn't get over how good the food tasted and asked for the restaurant they ordered it from, but Chihiro quickly took credit for another one of his culinary masterpieces, and she suggested coming to work for her as a part-time chef. Toki, on the other hand, was excited to finally have a drink after spending the last 2 nights in the office, and Miyako asked if he was okay with having such a hectic work life, but he said it was all worth it to produce cultured stories that should definitely be banned from the general public. He then remembered why he had such a busy work life and yelled at Itsuki for being a lazy, dumpster-faced creep. But Itsuki had grown tired of his verbal assaults and squared up. Later on, Setsuna dropped by his place to check on him, but he was in Canny's thighs, mumbling like an overwhelmed infant, while Chihiro decided to go get some supplies from his place. Moments later, he walked past Setsuna, who got wide-eyed when he saw that Chihiro had a divine pair of rice cakes and immediately begged him for a peek. Thinking the rainbow-colored lunatic had gone insane, Chihiro took off running. But Setsuna chased after him and managed to pull his pants down for a closer look at his vanilla buns. He was just about to take off his weird choice in underwear when Chihiro fractured his skull and walked off. Later on, they all started packing up, and Ashley said something about hoping they would get to have another picnic date in the future, but Haruto didn't like how ominous she made it sound. Itsuki, on the other hand, was absolutely sure of his successful future because of his psychotic level of self-confidence. The next night, they were all at Itsuki's place to watch the first episode of Haruto's anime, but Chihiro had other plans and promised to watch it at home. Haruto then asked Itsuki if he was down to trade siblings, but even the depraved sister-lover knew that his little sister was a beast in human skin. Haruto tried to defend her, but then he remembered the series of insults he endured earlier that day when he told her about his plans. He then suggested playing a card game to pass the time and decided to let whoever had the best school life experience start the first round. Itsuki was a friendless loner the entire time, while Canny spent most of her school days dodging bullies, and even Haruto experienced trauma in college, so Miyako got them started. Her first problem was to find a solution to forgetting her bathing suit, so she played a card to change into gym wear instead, but Coach Itsuki refused to let her train. Canny then suggested playing soccer in the pool with her plot cannons, but they also rejected the idea and gave Miyako the first L of the game. Itsuki was up next with a problem to explain why he accidentally called his teacher Mum, and they all thought it would be a nice, easy fix, but he suddenly told them about losing his mum in middle school and ruined the mood. Realizing what he did, he came up with a different answer, and they all made him think it was right so he wouldn't try to guilt-trip them again. For Haruto's problem, he had to fix a nasty case of bedhead and came up with the brilliant idea to balance a fishbowl on his head while playing the guitar so no one would notice. Despite the fact that his solution sounded like a crack addict's dream life, they decided to let him have the win since his fragile mental health needed it. For Canny's challenge, she had to fix a broken window at school, but things quickly took a dark turn when she started explaining an extremely disturbing plan to destroy the entire school and everyone in it for turning a blind eye to her suffering. After Itsuki smacked the demons out of her skull, he was the only one who thought she deserved a win because her struggles were a good excuse for low-key planning to become a serial assassinator. Canny loved him even more for the support and pounced to offer her cakes as a reward, but he rejected her again. Moments later, Miyako packed up the cards because Haruto's anime was minutes away from starting, but he started getting nervous, so they asked if he had not seen it already. After he explained that he kept his original copy aside to watch it live with them, they waited until it started playing, and the comments from excited readers who had been eagerly waiting started pouring in. Itsuki got excited to read all their comments while watching it, but that all changed when the viewers started complaining about it being a cliché piece of trash. His initial excitement slowly turned to sadness, and he barely even watched the last few minutes, so Itsuki and the girls watched the rest and turned it off to check on him. After saying he actually expected the adaptation to fail because of all the last-minute meetings he had to attend, he tried to drink the pain away. To make him feel better, Itsuki reminded him of their original dream to simply become successful writers, and it seemed to work because Haruto claimed to not really be bothered by all his fans suddenly hating his best work. But the facade fell apart in an instant, and he told them how painful it was to have years of hard work treated like a failed experiment. Just then, Miyako started bawling her eyes out, so they asked why she was upset since she wasn't even a writer, and she said it was because she could understand the pain of having your work disregarded. Canny then consoled her, and Haruto got up to leave so they wouldn't see him at such a low point, but Miyako's tears made him feel a little better. After getting into a cab, he posted a tweet ahead of the second episode and thought about Miyako would keep him at Itsuki's place the following week. Haruto read through the comments on the second episode and simply accepted that he was a washed-up fraud who clearly didn't have what it took to satisfy his audience. Watching him sulk reminded Itsuki of the day he talked about playing a board game after the anime adaptation, so he suggested using the game to change the mood and call the rest of the game. Afterwards, they all pulled up but had no clue about the game, so Haruto explained it in detail and said they could create characters completely different from their usually boring personalities. He then gave them sheets to select powers and other things for their special characters, but Miyako's pixelated brain still couldn't understand everything, so he broke it down a little more. Chihiro then asked if he could make his character a girl, but Itsuki was already miles ahead and told them about his plot-heavy female character named Tsukiko. Chihiro then decided to make his female character into Tsukiko's little sister and creeped Itsuki out for a moment, but he agreed to it, so Canny decided to push the boundaries by also making a little sister that would be addicted to clapping Tsukiko. After they all tried getting her to change it and failed, Miyako decided to make her character the oldest to keep Canny in line, but Itsuki wasn't comfortable with the idea of becoming a little sister. He took a moment to think about how it would affect his creepy dreams and ultimately agreed to it, so Haruto introduced the storyline before telling them to introduce their characters. While Miyako gave her character the same name with an ability to use magic and shoot coins, Tsukiko could generate any weapon she had seen. And Chihiro's character, Sen, was a skilled thief with magic nullification powers. To no one's surprise, Canny's character, a girl named Deathmask, served as a cultured amplifier that would increase all their abilities by clapping them. Haruto then started off by sending their characters on a mission to find accommodation in the game's fantasy land, but a bunch of adventurers interrupted to ask if they were down to share a room. Tsukiko thanked them for being such wonderful gentlemen because she also had Itsuki's negative IQ, so the others explained what the adventurers were really up to. She then threatened to rip out their filthy sausages and got ready to fight, but Haruto called them back to the real world to establish some ground rules for fighting in the game. Once that was done, Tsukiko started the brawl and the others quickly followed suit until they realized that firepower was not enough to stop the medieval of Takis. Deathmask then told Miyako that it was time for the amplification ritual, and she tried to talk her way out of it. But Deathmask grabbed her face and exchanged mouth juices while they all watched in shock. To make sure Miyako could get the most out of the ritual, Deathmask took off her armor until Miyako's powers started to burst out. Unfortunately, a group of soldiers crashed the party and tossed them all in a cell for public indecency. Just then, a princess named Silva showed up with a task to deliver something to a mysterious sage in exchange for their freedom. They easily agreed to it, but Itsuki took them back to reality to say that Haruto was likely cooking up a sinister plan with the letter they had to deliver. After stopping Itsuki from giving away too much information, they went back to the game and had to take on a bunch of low-level goblins before finding a lake. The girls took a good look at the water and thought it was safe for a dip, but Itsuki paused the game to talk about how low IQ baddies in movies always end up getting eaten by sharks because they randomly decided to jump in some mysterious lake. Once again, Haruto stopped his conspiracy theories and swore the waters were safe, so they went back into character and Canny convinced them to go skinny dipping. Right as they were really starting to enjoy it, Haruto summoned a tentacle monster that snatched up their plot cannons and specifically got its thick, slimy sausage into Canny's vanilla buns. Miyako used her magic to get free and attacked with a magic staff, but it wasn't enough to stop the monster. Tsukiko then tried to shoot out a plasma blast and ran out of gas, so she summoned a sword instead and freed Senator after getting to safety. Sen asked Tsukiko why she sacrificed herself, and she said it was her duty as the older sister. But Deathmask felt jealous, so Tsukiko reminded her that she was the only one enjoying the monster's tentacles. To repay her kindness, Sen got them both free, so they combined their strengths and took down the monster before getting to the palace Silva sent them to. The dark vibes started giving them second thoughts, so Deathmask suggested seeing what was in the letter, and it turned out to be a message tagging them as a sacrifice. As revenge for the setup, they decided to burn the place down, but that required Miyako's full power, so Deathmask started another ritual of live juices to boost her energy before blowing up the entire castle. They also confronted Silva about it, and she tried to attack them, but Sen canceled out her magic, and Tsukiko replicated the lake monster's tentacles to violate her plot. The next day, they strung her up for everyone to see and got rewards from the kingdom before Haruto pulled the plug on the game. After talking about how fun it was, they all left while Haruto hung back to thank Itsuki because he knew the entire thing was just to make him feel better. He then told Itsuki about his passion to create things that people would enjoy and said he wouldn't give up just because of his first big fail. Moments later, he was still sipping the beer and saw what Miyako wrote on her character's personality, which then pushed him to ask Itsuki if she had a boyfriend. Itsuki immediately knew he was down bad for her cakes and wanted to know more, so Haruto said he had been struggling with his feelings for her and finally felt ready to make a move if she was single. Itsuki then said he didn't know a lot about her personal life and sent her a text asking if she had a boyfriend, right as she was about to wax her milkers. Miyako got shocked and thought he was asking for himself, so she replied no and asked why, but he told her not to worry about it and left her a lot more confused than she initially was. Meanwhile, Haruto was excited to start making plans to ask her out, and Itsuki asked why he was so hyped up to do it. He then reminded Itsuki of his recent failures and said dating her would help him escape depression. Afterwards, Itsuki was brainstorming ideas to help Haruto out, but Canny interrupted to tell him about a surprise party she was planning for Miyako's birthday. Realizing that it would be the perfect opportunity to set something up, he told her to do it at his place, so she thanked him and asked for gift ideas, since his expertise as a cultured rom-com writer should have given him an idea of gifts girls would like. He then admitted to being a complete novice on the subject because the girls in his story were all shameless bops who would happily accept turd from the MC as a birthday gift. For some reason, their conversation shifted to Canny admitting to being his very own shameless bop in his failed attempts to teach her self-respect. Several minutes later, he realized that Canny was serious about getting something special for Miyako and asked why, so she told him just how deep her love for Miyako truly was. That only made his curiosity increase, so she went deeper and explained how Miyako's constant support made her feel like she finally had a big sister. The fact that Canny was starting to feel like a little sister spiked his dopamine receptors, but he played it cool and kept searching for gift ideas. He then asked Canny if Miyako had a favorite writer so he could try getting her an autograph, but Canny had no idea and decided to send her a text about it. She regretted it when Miyako said her favorite writer was actually Itsuki, and he teased her for being jealous before signing the autograph. Days later, they managed to pull off the surprise for Miyako's birthday, and she thanked Canny for setting it up before heading inside, and also thanking Chihiro for the buffet he cooked up. After a lot of birthday activities, Canny gave her an envelope with a flash drive containing a novel she wrote with Miyako as the main character. Itsuki desperately wanted to read it, but Canny said it was for Miyako's eyes only, so they went back to drinking. At one point, she asked Miyako how it felt to be in her 20s, and she said it felt weird because all the issues from her younger years were still a thing and her IQ points had not gone up. The boys also admitted to not having the mental growth spurt they expected, but Miyako said that they had already achieved independence while she was still trying to get out of being broke and lonely. Canny then said the lonely part shouldn't be a problem since she once claimed to have an endless supply of boys, but Miyako said she was still a hopeless virgin and lied about it back then to make herself look mature. She expected Canny to hate her for lying, but Canny said it didn't matter because she would always love and respect her for being so supportive. Hearing that made Miyako emotional, so she hugged her, and they both spent a few minutes trying to decide if kissing each other was a sign of growth in their friendship or a mental health issue. Later that night, Miyako got back home and slotted in the chip containing Canny's novel before getting sucked into her fantasy story that had a very intense love scene with a character weirdly similar to Itsuki. Miyako tried to stop herself from reading the rest of it, but she eventually gave in and spent the rest of the night gooning. The next morning, she thought about the conversation they had about being mature and hoped she wouldn't end up being a lonely Karen with cats and an endless supply of vibrators. Later on, Haruto was at Itsuki's place working, and used that as an opportunity to remind him of the promise he made to help with Miyako. After saying he had already forgotten about Haruto's attempt to escape loneliness, Itsuki suggested taking her to an amusement park. But Haruto said he wasn't ready for a solo date with her, so Itsuki reluctantly decided to get Canny involved for a double date. That weekend, the size of people at the park almost made Itsuki throw up, but Canny was weirdly excited, which confused them until she said it was her first time in a park. Miyako then suggested letting her pick their first ride, and they all agreed, but after reading the details moments later, Itsuki nearly soiled his pants and told them about a much safer option. Canny tried to make fun of him for clearly lacking balls, but he didn't care and said he was a little boy the last time he went on a thrill ride. After a lot of persuasion, he eventually got on the ride and thought it would be the end of him, but after it he got pumped to try the even scarier ones. Haruto and Miyako, on the other hand, were already regretting the entire thing and suggested taking things down a notch, so they spent most of the day trying out the usual rides and other games. On the way to try out a new one, Miyako kept staring at Canny and Itsuki until Haruto asked if she was okay. She then claimed to be tired, so he took her aside to grab a seat and got drinks before asking about her usual routine. After telling him that she usually hung out with her friends or went shopping, she asked for his usual routine as well, and it was mostly just reading books and being a master introvert. For some reason, she apparently thought he was an outside person, so he explained how chronically introverted he was before Itsuki and Canny got back to ask if they were down to try the first ride again. They both turned down the offer, so Canny dragged Itsuki along, and Haruto tried to continue the conversation with Miyako, but the expression she had while watching the lovebird The next day, Itsuki got excited to finally see the manuscript for his manga adaptation's first chapter, and Toki tried telling him to chill out, but he was sure it would be amazing because of Kaiko's talent. While telling Toki how glad he was to finally see the smashing scenes on paper, he skipped ahead and quickly lost his shit when he saw that the characters still had undies instead of clapping each other like cavemen. Toki then explained that Kaiko was some sort of underwear addict that apparently couldn't draw anything cultured without adding them. Afterwards, he invited her over with Kohai to demand answers, but all she could tell him was what Toki already said about her addiction. He then asked how she could easily betray him after he decided to trust her skill set, so she apologized but also wanted to know why he was always quick to strip the little sister. He explained how important it was for his readers to get the full experience of his love for little sisters by drawing every inch of their precious plot, but Kaiko thought it was barbaric to show it all, like their purity was not valuable. He suggested getting her backwater brain checked out and proceeded to have a verbal battle involving the part their families played in creating their creepy PDF way of expressing art. They both kept coming for each other until Itsuki heard the doorbell and told Setsuna that he had a lot going on with the adaptation. Aho immediately got starstruck and thanked Setsuna for letting her breathe the same air as him. He asked for the manuscript, so Itsuki handed it over and cussed Kaiko out for forcing them to read censored corn. Like Itsuki, he initially complimented Kaiko's drawings until he realized that the plots were all covered and went off the rails. She tried to defend her action, but he couldn't care less and told Itsuki she was bad for business, but Itsuki couldn't simply fire her because the rest of her drawings were solid. Setsuna then offered to draw the manga himself, but Kaiko refused to let him take her spot, so he challenged her to a drawing contest. Moments later, they were all at the office, and Toki explained the rules of the contest while Itsuki asked Kohai for his thoughts. Kohai was actually in favor of Setsuna, since he was the more experienced artist with a deep, troubled mind capable of bringing Itsuki's depravity to life. After interrupting their gossip session, Toki gave them permission to start, but Kaiko suddenly took off her bow, which turned out to be a special plot cover. Itsuki immediately attacked, but also couldn't understand why she was wearing it on her head, so she answered his questions by turning it into a mask to get herself in the right headspace for the contest. Before they could start, Itsuki called a timeout to address the elephant in the room, but Kaiko claimed the mask was her way of boosting creativity, so he gave it some thought and ultimately let it slide. With that settled, they both started an intense race to outdraw each other and managed to complete the entire section before the timer ran out. First up was Setsuna, and to no one's surprise, they all loved his unmatched skill in capturing the most cultured aspects of Itsuki's work. Kaiko, on the other hand, turned in something that initially made Itsuki a lot more pissed than he initially was, but after paying close attention to the way she slowly increased the level of exposure, they decided to give her the win. After Setsuna humbly took the L and admitted to letting his demons get the better of his talent, Itsuki also apologized for not recognizing the genius in her work and humbly asked her to finish drawing the rest of his manga so the readers could get a taste of her talent. Later that day, he was doing some research on plot armor and Canny caught him, but she couldn't understand why he needed them. She was used to the characters being uncovered, so he told her about Kaiko and didn't realize that Canny was already thinking of a way to turn his manga artist into pixie dust. She went to see Kaiko later on and wanted Miyako's help so they could both figure out why she was trying to change Itsuki's tastes. But Miyako didn't see anything wrong with it and made her upset. Canny then reminded her of all the times they would mess with each other's plot cannons, but Miyako easily denied it all to make herself look good, and Kaiko told her to stop being so desperate. She tried to make Canny understand how good plot armor actually was so she would see things differently, but the fun-sized freak refused to accept her ideologies and challenged her to a drawing contest to show that she could do a better job. While Kaiko's mask came in clutch as always, Canny drew something straight out of Frankenstein's lab, so Miyako told her to stick to writing instead. She then explained that Kaiko's drawings could ruin her marriage with Itsuki because she wanted to walk around all day with plot armor to make him obsessed with having her box for dinner. To fix that, Kaiko suggested pulling the plug on her cultured plans because she had no plans of changing her style of drawing. With no options left to change her mind, Canny channeled her demons and crashed into Kaiko to show her the beauty of a perfect pair of ripe melons. As Miyako watched in shock, Canny taught her the perfect technique, which caused her to make happy noises because she never knew the scissor technique was actually good. Just as Canny was about to grab her box, Kaiko turned the tables on her and said she was actually an experienced clapper who just appreciated plot armor a little more. Canny realized that she was dealing with a pro and begged Kaiko for a timeout, but Kaiko also tossed her armor and demonstrated a supreme clapping technique that left Canny tired and seconds away from passing out. Kaiko then admitted to seeing the advantage of leaving her plot cannons uncovered and agreed to draw some scenes without them. For that, she needed a new pair of melons that matched the main characters so she could get it right. Thankfully, they had the perfect test subject, but Miyako kept acting like she was not one of them until her plot armor came off. Days later, they were all at Itsuki's place to get his thoughts on the final drawings, so he looked through them and fell in love when he saw the plotful scenes Kaiko drew. Sometime in middle school, Itsuki's mom took a one-way trip to the Lord and left him with a nonchalant dad who remarried just 3 years later, causing him to hate everything about his family except for Chihiro, who was at his place again keeping him company. While eating dinner later that day, Chihiro told him about the job offer from Ashley and said he was actually going through with it. Itsuki was surprised to hear that, so Chihiro explained that he was planning to learn a thing or two about accounting to help out with his finances. Itsuki then wished him luck and told him to be careful around the fun-sized torturer. The next day, he found her office building and took the elevator up to her place, where she was waiting to welcome him. After saying that she was short-staffed due to a recent decline in work, he asked why she needed his services if she appeared to have everything under control. She then told him that she actually lived in the office and needed the kitchen cleaned up, so he went to take a look, thinking she was talking about dishes, and saw that she was basically living in a well-organized dumpster. Chihiro low-key wanted to bolt and get back to cooking for Itsuki, but he decided to test his limits and promised to do his best to restore the place. He immediately started a cleaning montage and kept battling roaches every few minutes until the kitchen went from getting abandoned trash dump to Michelin star restaurant vibes. As a reward for his efforts, she fixed him a bath, but things quickly took a turn when she came in and realized that Chihiro was actually a girl. Moments later, they both got into the bath, and Chihiro told her that Itsuki and his friends were the only ones too stupid to see the truth, because everyone else in her life could clearly see that she had a very feminine dump truck. She then begged Ashley to keep it a secret from Itsuki, and she agreed just to see how long it would take him to find out. The next day started with another one of Itsuki's Alabama love stories, but this time, the character's little sister was an ugly slime monster too hideous to be properly animated. As usual, Toki barely managed to read through the rest of the story and rejected it before asking for his progress with the original series. He claimed to already be at the finale, but Toki reminded him of the solitary confinement unit to remind him of the lengths he was willing to go as an editor. The next day, he asked Canny if she was down for a day at the zoo, and she immediately said yes, so they went to the nearest one and felt good seeing that it wasn't crowded like the amusement park. They first went to see a panda and talked about his overinflated dingleberries before going around to take pics of every other animal they could find. Afterwards, they went to get drinks, but Canny got distracted by the berries and started talking about the different types of balls she saw on all the animals. She had also taken pictures of every pair they came across and tried to add Itsuki's to the collection. But he hid them because they were too small and would only make her lose all attachment to his baby carrot. She then showed him the pic of his wax vanilla buns and said she was planning to make a huge picture frame with it for her goon sessions. Later on, their zoo trip served as inspiration for a finale where Crom summoned an alternate dimension Kung Fu Panda and a kangaroo with a magnum sausage to finish off Sieg and Hild. The new storyline started to sound like a dream fueled by meth, so he thought about another source of inspiration and decided to visit the aquarium again, and Chihiro also liked the aquarium, so he suggested going together. On the way there, she told him it was their first time going out together, and that took him back to the year they first became family. He didn't want anything to do with them and eventually moved out, but that was when his relationship with Chihiro started getting better. On the train ride, he noticed the weird expression on her face and asked about it, but she said it was nothing and spent the rest of that evening obsessing over all the different types of marine life and dishes she could make with them. On the way back to the station, Itsuki teased her for getting so excited, and she said it was because he had never taken her out before, so he promised to make it a regular thing before they got to the station. Once there, they heard an announcement about an accident that got all the rides for that evening canceled, so Itsuki suggested taking a cab together. During the ride home, they kept talking about the aquarium until Itsuki said Canny would have loved to be there and told Chihiro all about the pictures she took at the zoo and how good it felt to have someone he could be freely cultured with. When they got to the family house, she suggested spending the night since his room was still vacant, but he refused right before their dad showed up. He wanted to thank Itsuki for the souvenir he gave them from the trip to Hokkaido, but Itsuki ignored him, so he left. Chihiro then got out and told Itsuki to patch things up with their dad, but he also ignored her and left. Later that night, Haruto sent out a tweet acknowledging everyone involved with the anime adaptation and thanking the viewers for sacrificing their eyes. A couple of days later, Miyako went to Itsuki's place and found him looking like the last survivor of a zombie apocalypse. After begging her to get his manuscript to Toki, he passed out, so she went straight to the editor's office, where she explained what happened to Yamagata. She then took Miyako inside to see Toki, who was deep in hellish nightmare about Itsuki, and told her to leave the manuscript on his desk. The next moment, Miyako saw her looking at the cover page for Canny's current series and asked about it, so Yamagata explained that she had actually been struggling to reach the cultured author, who had still not sent in her manuscript with the deadline for sales just a couple of days away. Miyako offered to help her find Canny and sent her a text asking her to come over, to which Canny replied almost immediately. To nobody's surprise, the shameless author was in the hotel without clothes again and made Miyako strip as well, so they could play rock, paper, scissors without the rock and paper. Miyako refused and asked why she had not turned in her manuscript yet, so Canny told her that she was just not in the mood to write and said she would feel better if they massaged each other's milkers. Miyako refused again, but promised to let her do whatever she wanted after completing the manuscript. So Canny got on the bed and said she had to use her drumsticks as a pillow. After placing Canny's head on her drumsticks, Miyako asked why she wasn't using a laptop, so Canny explained that she could write with multiple devices and demonstrated by typing at the speed of sound until she finished the manuscript. Miyako gave her a pat on the head for finally doing her job, and she suggested taking over from Yamagata as her editor, but Miyako started giving her tips that would improve their relationship without realizing that Canny was trying to get her out of unemployment. After her slow brain finally caught up, she went to submit the manuscript to Yamagata, who then thanked her for all the help and started complaining about everyone she would have to apologize to simply because Canny was too much of a spoiled brat to do her job. Miyako also tried giving her tips to improve the professional relationship between her and Canny, but she said that would only get her into a situation way worse than what Toki was having to deal with. Miyako then asked if she had ever considered quitting the job, but she said the thought had never even crossed her mind because she actually liked being the first to read Canny's novels. Days later, they all met up at Itsuki's place to celebrate the release of both their books, and Canny tried to tell them exactly how Miyako had been helping speed up her work, but she stopped her blabbing about their cultured rituals. After she threatened to pull out Itsuki's spine for asking too many questions, Haruto came up with an idea to play a storytelling card game, and they played rock, paper, scissors to get started. Itsuki was first up and came up with a story about a brother and sister who were both deeply in love with and clapped each other every single day. The moment he started describing her beauty, Canny interrupted with her playing card and continued the story by introducing a hot, plotful witch that cursed the sister to become a wolf and would only cure her if the brother agreed to become her husband. Desperate to save his sister, He agreed to it and ended up falling for the witch's soft melons and rice cakes, but then Chihiro interrupted with her playing card to continue the story. As agreed, the witch healed his little sister but was rewarded with a broken heart when he decided to dump her perfectly sculpted vanilla buns for his Alabama love story. At that point, Chihiro couldn't come up with ideas anymore, so Canny took over and made the witch exact her revenge by turning the brothers' baby carrot into an anaconda and leaving them both looking like Adam and Eve before the forbidden fruit. The only way to get out of the curse was to find and appease her, but Haruto took over and introduced a giant that hunted them both until they entered a cave to hide and found a sacred sword. The older brother grabbed it to defend against the giant, but his extra-large magnum sausage made it impossible to swing the sword, so he tossed it and used the magic stick to fight off the giant and chased it back into the woods. Being the only sane person in the group, Miyako wanted to finish the story right, but Canny kept giving her a bunch of ideas to redesign the older brother's sausage until she got fed up and decided to leave it the way it already was. After defeating the giant, the mega sausage brother went on to battle countless enemies with his mutated glizzy until the king awarded him and gave him permission to start a harem with his little sister and the plotful witch. After taking a few minutes to acknowledge the fact that they were sick in the head, Itsuki came up with a brilliant idea to turn their game into an actual book, but Haruto was quick to shut the idea down and told him to stop spending so much time with Canny, who was just about to hit the snooze button. It had gotten late by then, so Chihiro and Miyako got ready to leave, but Canny was too tired and decided to sleep on Itsuki's bed, so they both left while he had a drink with Haruto. Once he could hear Canny's snores, Haruto asked Itsuki why he had still not asked her out since it was clear how much he liked her. Itsuki first wanted to know why he suddenly brought up the topic, but Haruto simply said he had his reasons and didn't want to say anything else. Itsuki then denied having those kinds of feelings for Canny, but Haruto told him to stop the cap and kept asking questions until he caved and admitted to even wanting to marry her, so they could cuddle and smash cheeks for the rest of their cultured lives. He then explained that getting together with her would instantly put them both in the media, but while she would be talked about as the highly talented author who fell in love, he would be the wannabe trying to use her for clout. He wanted to wait until his talent could speak for itself, so he wouldn't be a background character in her life. Haruto understood what he meant, so he wished him luck, and they both didn't realize that Canny had been listening the entire time. Later that night, he was just starting to really enjoy reading Canny's book when Toki called to tell him something. He interrupted and said he already knew that Canny had way more sales than him, but nothing could prepare him to hear Toki say that his book had just been approved for an anime adaptation. Back when Itsuki was in 6th grade, his mom got sick, and he had to spend most of his time at home alone with Midahora, a maid hired by his dad to make sure he couldn't starve himself. Shortly after that, his mom passed, and he was already a weird loner by then, so he just continued life as it was and picked up an interest in books. Days later, things changed when a hot high school girl named Ayane dropped by. She was actually Midahora's daughter and wanted to keep him company because she heard he was feeling down, but he said she didn't have to do that just because her mom told her to. She claimed it had nothing to do with her mom and said she had been hearing so much about him over the last few months that she just started to feel like he was a lonely little brother in desperate need of a responsible older sister. He tried to tell her about his thing for being the older brother addicted to loving his sister, but she ignored him and went up to his room to find a book she could read. She first picked up a cultured one, and he tried to explain himself, but she said it was no big deal since all her friends had books like that at home. He then tried to find something good for her, but she told him not to bother stressing over it as she would be okay reading whichever one he was most interested in. After he gave her the book that started his love for little sisters, she promised to return it the following week, and that ended up becoming a whole thing. She would come over every week to read with him and even put on cosplay outfits without realizing that he was slowly getting hooked. He eventually made up his mind to tell her about his feelings, but the following week she showed up with tears in her eyes and told him about a crush that rejected her. He then asked for a description of the Sigma Chad that turned down an opportunity to smash her perfect buns, so she told him about the guy. But he turned out to be a midget beta who wasn't even good looking. He got tired of hearing her describe him and stopped her to confess his feelings, which left her stunned for a moment. He immediately followed up by asking for a date, but she rejected him, and he couldn't understand why since he clearly matched her type. She then explained that he had been brother-zoned right from the first day they met and made him cry, so he told her never to come back again because he only wanted to love a little sister. After spending the rest of that evening bawling his eyes out, he went back to his sad, lonely life and kept it up until after graduation. When the annual contest for new writers came up, he finished another one of his books and decided to give the whole writing thing a try, kickstarting what would lead to him becoming an independent creep making a living from his fantasies. Afterwards, he woke up on Canny's thighs, and she asked if he was dreaming about popping her cherry, but unfortunately, it was another one of his fantasies that had nothing to do with her. Later on, they all came together to celebrate him finally getting an anime adaptation, and Toki dropped by shortly after to ask why he had to run his mouth just a day after hearing the news. After Itsuki told him not to worry about it since it was only his close friends that knew anything, they both talked about how busy their lives were about to become, while Miyako watched them and realized that they were actually a good match when they weren't trying to end each other over a deadline. Later that day, Haruto brought out a new game he got to celebrate Itsuki's anime adaptation, and they all decided to play it. They basically had to roll dice to play out a make-believe version of a writer's life, so Chihiro got started by tossing her dice and getting into a major label. After Canny did the same and also debuted in a major label, Itsuki decided to take his shot as well, but he got rejected. Miyako then got into a minor label, and Haruto chose the unpopular internet novelist route that no one else seemed interested in. With the basics covered, Chihiro rolled again and got a huge profit from the sales of her first release. As they took turns rolling dice, Haruto kept getting rejected by the major labels, so they told him to consider going for a mid-level label, but he refused to give up. On the other hand, everyone else was making a ton of money except Haruto, who was still just with enough to cover rent because he left the label deals to enjoy cheap internet fame. At a certain point, Canny missed a deadline, and it came with a serious drawback on her career, which confused her. Toki then woke up and explained that missing deadlines in major labels was a recipe for disaster in a writer's career. Hearing that, Itsuki dropped his dreams of getting into one, and Haruto finally got a deal that changed his life. As the game progressed, they all eventually got a lot of money on certain occasions, but it also came with a lot of struggle and screw-ups that ultimately made their make-believe life as writers seem a lot less fun. At the end of the game, they realized that becoming a writer wasn't all rainbows and sunshine, but Itsuki still chose to continue fighting for his dreams because it was fun, and Canny promised to stick with him through it all. Afterwards, they all left Itsuki's place, and Toki wished them a good night's rest before leaving, but Miyako followed him to ask about life as an editor, so he offered her a part-time job at the office. Shortly after that, Canny was back in her hotel soaking up her plot with the AC and thought about what Itsuki said the other night. The next day, Haruto went to the bookstore and heard some fans gushing over how good his books were despite the adaptation flop, so he decided to keep pushing for success. Meanwhile, Itsuki was back at his place thinking about the call with Toki on the night the adaptation became official. Toki told him it was because someone else's adaptation fell through, but Itsuki didn't care and promised to do his best. While he got started on what could potentially change the course of his life, Chihiro was in the bath and finally made up her mind to tell him the truth. Will the truth about Chihiro change Itsuki's motivation to continue chasing his dreams of becoming a successful writer or lead to an even creepier version of him that ends up crushing Canny's heart? That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.